So the topic we are going to see under the financial management is working capital management. So first we just want to know about capital. The commerce students will be more aware about the topic capital. Anyhow, for your better understanding, capital can refer to any fund raised to support a particular business or project. It can also mean stock or ownership in a company. So hence, this capital is divided into two main categories called as fixed capital as well as working capital. So fixed capital, it means for every business needs, funds are required for two different purposes. One is for its establishment and other is for carrying the day-to-day operations. So for example, when you are in need of capital for purchase of fixed asset such as plant and machinery or land or building etc., the firm is in need of fixed capital. So once this fixed capital is utilized inside the concern, it means that it is a blockage of assets. It cannot be further utilized in the business. Whereas working capital is the capital which is required for the short term requirement of the concern. So the funds can be generated from cash, marketable securities, debtors, inventories. When these funds are engaged in current assets, it keeps revolving fast and hence it will be constantly converted into cash. So now you would have a better understanding on fixed and working capital. So in short, the working capital means it is the capital which is required for day-to-day expenses of the concern. Working capital refers to short-term funds to meet operating expenses. It refers to the funds which a company must possess to finance its day-to-day operations. It is concerned with the management of firm's current asset and current liabilities. So here the operating expenses is the expense that a business incurs to engage in activities which is not directly associated with the production of goods. Some examples of operating expenses are sales commission, insurance, etc. So current asset, so it is the term where the asset which can be easily converted into cash, so it is called as a current asset. And current liability, so current liability is a company's short term financial obligations that are due within a year. So hence the working capital refers to short term fund to meet operating expenses and it refers to the funds which a company must possess to finance its day-to-day operations. So I think you all are clear in the concept of working capital, fixed capital, current asset and current liability. So we can move on to the next slide. Constituents of current asset and current liability. So current asset includes inventories such as raw material, work in progress, finished goods, trade debtors, loans and advances, investment, cash and bank balances. Current liabilities, it includes sundry creditors, trade advances, short-term borrowings, etc. So every time we are speaking about working capital. So I would like to tell you why this working capital is needed. So we are in need of working capital for different purposes. So it may be for the purchase of raw material, to pay wages and salaries, to ensure day-to-day overhead costs such as fuel, power and office expenses, to meet selling costs such as packaging and advertisement expenses, to provide credit facilities to the customers and to maintain the inventories of raw material, work in progress and finished goods. So these are the various needs or objectives of working capital. So the next we are going to see about the concept of working capital. There are two different concepts of working capital, which means gross working capital and the net working capital. So the term gross working capital is the capital which is calculated by using all the current assets of a balance sheet. So gross working capital is the sum of all current assets of the company. So for example, when you are taking a trading company in receiving all orders in cash. Again, when the company is going for purchases with a wholesaler on credit, hence it doesn't have any current asset than the cash balance of the concern. So the company have to see its optimum investment in current asset too. So the next is the financing of current asset. It means that either it may go for short-term sources or for long-term sources. There are also various approaches which can be followed, such as matching, conservative and aggressive approach. The significance of gross working capital is the optimum investment in the current asset and financing of current asset. The next is net working capital. So as the net working capital is the difference between the current asset and the current liability. So the significance of the net working capital is maintaining the liquidity of the concern. So liquidity, it refers to the easy conversion of asset or any security into ready cash. So simply it means it is to get cash whenever you are in need of. The second one is to decide upon the extent of long-term capital in financing the current asset. So the next is kinds of working capital. So as we have already discussed about the gross working capital and the net working capital, the summation is gross working capital is nothing but the current asset, balance of the current asset. The net working capital is the difference between the current asset and the current liability of a concern. There is also a concept of positive or negative working capital. So when the current asset is exceeding the current liability of the concern, it is called as positive, and the negative represent the vice versa. Hence, the negative working capital does not allow to utilize the fixed asset due to non-availability of liquid funds. So it will be affecting the profitability or the rate of return of the concern. The next kind of working capital is divided on the basis of time. So on the basis of time, it is classified as permanent working capital and the temporary working capital. Whereas permanent working capital is something that the firm should maintain some minimum amount of raw material, work in progress or finished goods or bank balance, which a business should carry at the time irrespective of the level of manufacturing. Then temporary or variable working capital. So it is nothing but an amount of working capital which is required to meet the seasonal demands and some special exigencies. A better example, when I'm having a manufacturing unit of hand sanitizers and masks, now due to corona outbreak, my product is more demanded at present situation. To meet this, the temporary working capital, which is also called as seasonal or special working capital, can be utilized. So the next we are going to see about management of working capital. So the basic goal of working capital management is to manage the current asset and current liability of the firm in a satisfactory level. So hence it is divided into three dimensions. The first dimension is concerned with the formulation of policies with regard to profitability, risk and liquidity. The second dimension is based on the decision about the composition and level of current asset. The third dimension is based on the decision about the composition and level of current liability. So thus these three dimensions will make the working capital to be maintained in the concern adequately. The next we are going to see about the operating and cash conversion cycle. So the time that lapses between the purchase of raw material and the collection of cash for sale is referred as the operating cycle. So this is a better example of an operating cycle where the cash is converted to raw material, it is given to suppliers, it is given as a wage or salaries to workers, where in turn this raw material is converted into work in progress and finished goods. So once the goods are distributed, then it will lead for an accounts receivable. So this process will be continuing. So this is the better understanding for working capital cycle. So the next we are going to see about the need to maintain a balanced working capital. So what is the need of maintaining a balanced working capital? When a working capital is not maintained adequately, where an inadequacy of working capital may lead to a firm's insolvency, or an excessive working capital will lead a business in a not good situation. So for maximization of profit or minimization of working capital cost, or to maintain a balance between liquidity and profitability, there is a need to maintain a balance in working capital. It should not be excessive or inadequate. So the next we are going to see what is the cause of maintaining excessive working capital inside an organization. So it increases the stock level, of which may leads to excessive working capital requirements. So it may leads to mishandling of inventories, waste, theft and losses. Then second, it is an indication of defective credit policy. So you all know about collection period. It is nothing but it is the average number of days between the dates that credit sales were made and money received from customers. For example, if a company gives 1 month of credit period, it should collect the balance within at least 45 days, so that the company is maintaining a good credit policy system. The third, it leads to managerial inefficiency. So these are all the dangers of maintaining an excessive working capital. The next, the dangers of inadequate working capital. So when the working capital is not sufficiently maintained, these are the dangers which is faced by a concern. The first one is it stagnates the growth. It is difficult to implement the production, because without any working capital we cannot produce the units. It leads to inefficient utilization of fixed asset, and it hampers the firm's goodwill in the market. So there are certain factors which are influencing the working capital. So we will be discussing about it one by one. The first one is the nature of business. So according to the nature of business, the requirement of working capital may vary. For example, when we go for electricity or water supply etc., need of working capital is very low here, because they will be giving cash sales and they will be supplying services but not products. So when we go for any trading or manufacturing or financial firms, they are in need of large working capital. The next one is the size of the business. So size can be measured in scale of operations. When the operation scale is greater in size, the requirement of working capital is also a huge amount. The next one is the seasonality of operations. So in some cases, the raw materials may not be available throughout the year. So here the firm has to decide and has to buy the raw material in bulk. So at the time of purchase, this firm is required a large amount of working capital. The next one is the production policy. So due to seasonal variations, the requirement of working capital may vary, hence they will lead on to production policy. Production may be kept higher or slagging according to the seasonal needs of a concern. So the next is production cycle process, which means the length of the production cycle. When the process period is so longer, the larger amount of working capital is required. And when the process period is so shorter, the working capital requirements may vary. So the next is the credit policy. So when a concern purchases for credit and sells its product on cash, then they may require lesser amount of working capital. So alternatively, when it goes for cash purchase and sells to credit policy, then they are in need of larger amount of working capital. The next one is the business cycle. So we already know about the various cycles of business stages. So here we are going to discuss about the boom and the depression stage. So when the company is in boom stage, they are in need of high working capital because the sales is more, the expansion activities can be done during the period. When the company is facing the depression period, the working capital requirement is also so low because they will be late in collecting the debts. The selling activities will be more dull. The last one is the growth and expansion. So it depends upon the rate of growth of concern. So we are in need of retaining the profits for expansion of the business too. The next, we are going to see about the factors influencing the working capital. So these are the 5 factors which influence the working capital requirements. The first one is the profit level and the dividend policy, which is distributed to the shareholders, the price level changes, the operating efficiency of the firm, and the availability of credit period. So the determination of required working capital. So this is the chart. We determine the requirement of the working capital where the current assets are mentioned in point A like raw material, work in progress, finished goods, debtors, cash balance. So which is mean the total of current asset. And in point B they have mentioned about the estimation of current liabilities like creditors and outstanding expenses. So it is the total current liabilities. The net working capital can be identified by A minus B, that is current asset minus current liabilities. The next we are going to discuss about the working capital policies. So by taking into considerations of what should be the ratio of current asset to sale, there are 3 different policies which have to be implemented. The first one is called as aggressive policy. So in this type, the firm will carry a low level of current asset in relation to the sale. The next one is the moderate policy. So here the firm will have a moderate level of current asset in relation to sale. Hence, it will have a sufficient resources which may be available for investment in business and maintain the liquidity of the firm. The third one is the conservative current asset policy. So it will carry a high level of current asset in relation to the sale. So this is what it is depicted in the chart, where x-axis have sales and y-axis have the asset. So these are the 3 different policies called as conservative, moderate and aggressive policy. So the next we are going to see about the various financial approaches of working capital. So by taking into consideration of what should be the ratio of short-term financing to long-term financing of the working capital, there are three different approaches to be followed. The first one is called as hedging approach, where the term means the fixed asset and current assets should be financed with long-term sources and temporary sources or financed through short-term. This conservative approach, where the firm depends upon long-term finance and permanent working capital needs with long term, and only a small portion of temporary working capital will be financed to the short term sources. The third one is the aggressive approach. Here the firms uses more short term sources of financing, where the temporary and permanent is to finance through short term sources. So the next we are going to see about financing of working capital. So as we have discussed earlier, there are two types of financing for working capital, that is long term financing and the short term financing, where it can be raised through shares, debentures, plowing back of profits, loans from financial institutions, etc. for long term, and for short terms we will be using accruals like taxes and wages, and trade credit, which represent the credit extended by the suppliers of goods and services. Then working capital advances from commercial banks like cash credit, overdraft, discounting of bills, etc. Then public deposits. So we will be inviting from the public, receiving the deposit from the public. So the maturity period may vary from 5 years to 8 years. Then short-term loans can be arranged from the financial institutions. Factoring, which involves sales of accounts receivables. So these are all the various short-term funds which can be raised through short-term financing. Thank you.